I thought about getting one of these Pokemon. It was back when I was expanding my farm as I was getting this field enclosure set up and was making the barrier fields big enough to support everything I was raising. I knew I was going to need some Pokemon's help with the fields, and I looked at all the horse Pokemon, debating which one I was going to go with. In the end, I decided to go with Landslide my Mudsdale, but I still remember being sorely tempted to get a Rapidash. Those fiery manes and the elegance they have when they run, it was really tempting. But Ponyta and Rapidash weren't right for the job that I was looking at. They aren't plowing or hauling Pokemon, they're more racing and contest Pokemon. And for many people, that's exactly what they're looking for. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Pokemon Care Guides, where we go through how you would raise and care for different Pokemon species in your own home. Today, we'll be talking about the fiery-maned Pokemon Ponyta and its evolution Rapidash. Ponyta is a 3-foot-tall equine Pokemon with a cream-colored coat, large brown eyes, and the iconic red mane of flames that goes from the head of the Pokemon down its back and forming the tail. It also has small tufts of flame at each elbow of its leg. Ponyta is relatively small, like I said, standing 3 foot 3 inches tall and weighing only about 66 pounds. In all, not that complex of a body shape, and the evolution Rapidash doesn't change very much. Sure, it's bigger, standing 5 foot 7 inches tall at the shoulder, and being a surprisingly light weight of 209 pounds. Aside from the increase in size, the only changes that Rapidash has made is that the mane of fire is now much wilder, flaring out behind the Pokemon, especially as it runs. Its eyes have also now changed from brown to a burning red, and in the center of its forehead, a long horn has grown, reminiscent of its Galarian forms. And that's really it. Like I said, these guys aren't that complex in their body shape, but are they complex in their care? Well, let's get into it and find out if these Pokemon are the perfect Pokemon partners for you. Enclosure. The enclosure for these Pokemon is going to be relatively easy and simple compared to a few other enclosures that we've gone over in the past. Thanks to their biology as grazing grassland Pokemon, all they really need is a grass field that they can graze the grass from. Now, mind you, that doesn't mean that you can just let them roam in your backyard. For one thing, they need at least 3 acres of field to feel comfortable, and that 3 acres must be divided into 3 different paddocks. I'm sure that you, just like I did when I first found out this information, are asking, why do you need to divide it into 3 separate paddocks? Why not just let them wander the entire 3 acres? Well, it's because of their grazing feeding method. If you allow them to wander the entire field all at once, they'll never allow the grass to grow up very high, leading to it having less nutrition overall for them. This is why in the wilds you see the herds of these Pokemon are migratory, as they're constantly looking for new patches of better tastier grass. Now, of course, you aren't just letting your Ponyta or Rapidash wander wherever they want to feed on whatever grass they want. Pokemon don't respect borders, and they will end up eating your neighbor's yard. But you also don't want them to just wander the full 3 acres, as that'll leave the entire thing without a chance to grow. Hence, the 3 different paddocks, allowing them to still wander and graze, while allowing the other 2 paddocks that they aren't in time to grow. Each paddock should then be surrounded by a fence that denotes the boundaries of the paddock. Mind you, the fence is going to have to be rather large, considering the jumping strength of these Pokemon. Ponyta have been recorded jumping as high as 12 feet in the air, so you're going to need a fence that's at least that high up. It should be constructed of wooden beams, carefully made in such a way that they won't be able to slip through and get out. And I can already hear plenty of you, why use wood for a fire type? Well, for multiple reasons. Chain link is harder to see over longer distance, and these Pokemon love to run. If these Pokemon get a good head of steam going and don't realize that they need to stop because the fence is harder for them to see, then they might not be able to stop in time and crash into it, hurting themselves. If it's a wooden fence, then not only is it easier for them to see over long distances, but if they don't have time to stop, then they can still use their fire to avoid getting hurt. Sure, it'll be a pain to have to fix the pen and recapture your loose Pokemon, but it's better than them hurting themselves. And lastly is because this line has the intriguing ability to make it so that their flames only burn when they want them to. This is why you can only ride a Rapidash that wants you to ride them, and what makes breaking a wild Rapidash so hard. It's very much a defense mechanism, and that means that they aren't very likely to go around using it on their enclosure or the fencing unless they feel that they have to. So, now you have the fencing, and now you have the paddocks. Now you need to get them some shelter. I'm sure many of you are thinking of getting a stall, which, after speaking with a few professionals that routinely work with these Pokemon, such as Bex from the Fire Pokemon Sanctuary, I've learned that those aren't strictly necessary. Really, what stalls are good for are for isolation. If one of your Pokemon is sick, or they're getting bullied by some of the other Pokemon, or you have some really nasty weather coming through, then yeah, they can be very helpful. And a stall is just a small space with a sliding door that has a spot for them to eat, drink, and relax. People with large amounts of these Pokemon often have large barns full of stalls just to house all of them. But, like I said, a stall isn't totally needed. Equine Pokemon, especially Ponyta and Rapidash, love open space, and are completely fine with being out in their fields all the time. Instead of a stall for them, you can get what's known as a run-in shed. This is a structure that's almost like the awning that I described for the Geodude guide. Oftentimes, it's a structure with a roof and 3 walls that's just large enough for your equine Pokemon to run underneath for multiple different reasons, be it to escape the weather, to take a nap, or to eat and drink. You need to be sure that the structure is deep enough to accommodate all of your Pokemon underneath at once, and to provide them escape from bad weather, especially in rain that might be blowing hard enough to come underneath. You should also provide them with some sort of soft bedding underneath the run-in shed, like sawdust, wood chips, or straw. And, same as with the fence, you shouldn't have to worry about them being set on fire, since these Pokemon are not likely to burn down their home on a whim. And the last thing you'll need under the run-in shed will be the water trough and a dry space for their food. The food spot is simple, just pick a spot that won't get wet. But the water trough, you need to be sure to get one that's large enough for the Pokemon you have. Each Ponyta will drink about 5 gallons of water a day, and Rapidash, depending on how much it moves around throughout the day, could drink anywhere between 8 to 18 gallons per day. If you get a trough that's too small, your Pokemon could become sick and they won't be happy with you. The last thing we're going to talk about with the enclosure is going to be what other Pokemon can be housed with them. Of course, the thing that I'm sure many of you are thinking is that they can be housed with each other, and that is true to an extent. Females can readily be housed with each other, and actually the enclosure setup that I've laid out for you here can house between 5 to 6 Ponyta and around 2 to 3 Rapidash per paddock. So you could easily have a bunch of females together. Males will only get along with each other though if there are no females around, and even then it's iffy. They may still decide to kick, bite, and even use their horns and fire on each other as a show of dominance. And if you introduce a female to the equation, then it'll get even worse. So if you're gonna have a male of the Ponyta line, then be sure that he is with only females or only males. As for other Pokemon, the Mudspray line is a good choice, though you have to be careful because the gender rules still apply, and a male Mudsdale will be able to really harm any Rapidash that it doesn't like. As well, other common farm-like animals like the Miltank line or the Go-Goat line would do okay with these Pokemon. Avoid the Tauros line as they can be very aggressive, and any swine-like Pokemon, like the Spoink line and the Tepig lines, as they can end up getting a taste for meat, and equines like the Ponyta line won't really put up with them. Really, keep anything that looks like a predator away from this line, even other household Pokemon like the Meowth line or the Growlithe line. The only times that they interact well with those kinds of Pokemon are only if they have been very well trained and they have been well conditioned over a long period of time to be used to them. And even then, they can still be somewhat skittish. I'm certain that I've missed a few Pokemon in this explanation, but in general, these Pokemon will do okay with most herbivorous prey Pokemon. Just remember that any enclosure that I describe for you in these guides are only built to handle the Pokemon that the guide is about. Sure, these paddocks can hold multiples of the Ponyta line at once, but always be sure to expand and accommodate any other Pokemon that you intend to house with them. Availability. Despite, and possibly because of, the popularity of this Pokemon line in the horse world, they really aren't that available in the wild. As well, the wild populations that are out there frequent places that no novice trainer or simple enthusiast should be going. Places like Mount Ember in the Sevi Islands and Mount Silver between Kanto and Johto. The easiest place that you're going to find these Pokemon is going to be the Sinnoh region, as most of the northern routes have a decent population of these Pokemon, despite the heavy rain that they can sometimes get. As well, the few routes between Kanto and Johto regions around Mount Silver and the Indigo Plateau do have a significant population. There may also be a small population of them in Unova, just outside Lakanosa town, but if they are there, it's a very small population that may be very hard to find. And aside from that, there's really nothing from these Pokemon out there, which makes the breeding scene for these Pokemon immense. Thanks to the beauty of these Pokemon and the fact that they are used in races and shows and competitions, there are tons of people that breed and sell just these Pokemon. Their popularity is so high that even if you couldn't house a bunch of them together and the feeding wasn't so simple, there would still be a surplus of them on the market. These Pokemon tend to beat out any other kind of equine in popularity. If you want a Ponyta or a Rapidash, then you will have no trouble finding them at all. Just be sure you're ready to part with some serious money, because when it comes to these Pokemon, common does not mean cheap. Catchability. I'm going to be honest here. The best chance you have of catching one of these Pokemon is if you already have one of these Pokemon. The two major things that are going to make these Pokemon hard to catch is the fact that they often travel in herds and their speed. The herd thing is going to make it tough because sneaking close enough to a Pokemon to catch it in a Pokeball is tough most times. With these Pokemon, you're not only trying to sneak up on one of them, but an entire herd. And if one of them sees you and starts running, you better bet they're all going to start running. Which brings us to their speed. Because once they start running, good luck catching them. These Pokemon are blisteringly fast, with the fastest Rapidash being clocked at a max speed of 150 miles an hour, which ironically means the best way to catch up with and catch one of these Pokemon is with one of these Pokemon. By riding your own Rapidash, you'll be able to catch up to one of the herd and catch them rather easily. But that means you already have to have a Rapidash, so you're just catching a second one. Not to mention that by going after a wild one, you'll have to most likely go to a rocky and mountainous area that really inexperienced trainers should not be going to. And by getting a wild one, you're going to have to put a lot more effort into the training and breaking of that Pokemon. In all, even in the best circumstances, these are not the easiest Pokemon to catch. But if you are determined to catch your own wild Pokemon, then I would suggest Pokeballs or Great Balls for Ponyta and 100% Ultra Balls for Rapidash. Care. Let's talk about food first, as it's probably going to be the simplest and shortest part of this section. So, of course, in warmer times or in warmer climates, then these guys can just eat the grass in their paddocks. After all, they are grazers, and that is their main way of getting nutrients in the wild. However, if you live in a place that gets cold at any point during the year and the grass stops growing, then you will have to provide them with hay. Not straw, which is what we used for the bedding, but the greener, leafier hay. Get them a bale and place it inside their run-in shed or their stall, and they should munch on it as the day goes on. In general, a Ponyta will eat about 3/4 of a bale a day, with Rapidash eating twice that. Feeding time wise, like I said, these Pokemon are grazers and need constant access to food. So check on them throughout the day, and if you notice that the food amount is getting low, then just head out and replace it. On top of the hay or grass, there are also supplemental nutritional things that you can give them that'll provide them with some extra nutrients, vitamins, and minerals to help their health. Things like grains and oils for complex carbs, and fats that can be hard to get from just grass or hay. The amount to give them can differ depending on how active the Pokemon is, but the normal is to feed them this stuff once or twice a day, giving Rapidash 5 quarts over the course of the day, and Ponyta getting half of that. Like I said, this depends on how active your Pokemon is, so keep an eye on their weight as the days go by. If they start to put on an excess amount of weight or they start to lose too much weight, then adjust the supplements accordingly. The last thing that's related to food that I wanted to mention is the difference between wild and breeder-raised Pokemon. As I mentioned in the availability and catchability sections, the wild populations live in mountainous regions, where the grass that they find is sparse and tough, holding a lot less sugar than lowland varieties. Because of this, the wild populations of Ponyta and Rapidash have evolved to be less tolerant of sugars and more tolerant of a diet of tough legumes like hay. This isn't the case with the breeders that have had generations of these Pokemon feeding on the sweet lowland grass, so they've adapted to be able to handle the higher sugar content. All this is to say that if you end up getting a wild-caught one of these Pokemon, keep an eye on how much grass you allow them to eat. The higher sugar content could cause them to become very sick. You may have to remove some of the grass from the paddocks and provide them more hay to eat all year round, even if you live in a warmer climate. Alright, let's get to the interaction between you and the Pokemon, because the main reason that people want these Pokemon is to be able to ride them. Well, first things first, do not ride a Ponyta. Even if you're planning on only putting a small child on them, don't do it. Ponyta are small and still developing and growing, hence the evolution into a Rapidash. Their bodies are just not strong enough to handle the weight of a person of any size on their back. Only Rapidash can be ridden. Now, that's not to say you can't start training your Ponyta for riding before it evolves. In fact, that's the best way to do it. Start with a Ponyta and get it used to doing everything except for carrying your weight. That way, once it evolves, then you don't have much left to do and you're not trying to work with a fully grown, powerful Pokemon. The other thing to consider is that this will be much easier with a breeder-raised Pokemon than a wild one. These Pokemon can be very spirited and stubborn, so training might not take that well. You have to be willing to put up with the animal not listening to you and being able to control an animal that doesn't want to be near you. Getting one from a Ponyta breeder means that they at least will be used to having humans around, if not working with humans. But for those of you that want a wild-caught Ponyta, let's start from the beginning. Right after you're catching your Pokemon, you want to get them used to their enclosure, allowing them to get used to the space, understanding that this is their new home that they're safe in. During this time, they may be very skittish towards you, and that's okay. What you're going to do is set a routine. Equine Pokemon like Ponyta and Rapidash love their routines when in captivity, so when you bring the food out every day, do it at the same times every day. Same with the water. This repetition every day will help them feel more settled into their enclosure and, more importantly, more settled around you. Then, once the routine is set and they're getting into it, start by just getting closer. Just a little bit every day. Start by being 20 steps away, and then 19 the next day, and so on. There will be days where you aren't able to get closer than the previous one. It's not going to just be a smooth increase. But over time, the bond between you will start to strengthen and you'll be able to get closer and closer. Once you get within touching distance, this is where you need to be careful. Ponyta and Rapidash are, obviously, covered in fire. And while that won't be a concern for you later on, once you have a good strong bond with them, for now that bond is still new, and that fire will most likely be very hot. So you're going to need to get some protection from that heat. To this end, you're going to need to get one of those fireproof suits. You know, the full body ones that are all metallic and shiny. But don't just put it on and approach your Pokemon. They won't recognize you in the suit if you do that. So you'll have to slowly get them used to the suit and get them to recognize that it's you inside of it. You can do this by keeping to the routine you've established, but by maybe leaving the hood off the suit so the Pokemon can see it's you, or by putting it on in front of them so they can make the connection that you're inside of it. The end goal of this is that you're able to approach the Pokemon in or out of the suit without them freaking out. With this protection on, start physically interacting with the Pokemon. Petting them, brushing them, even feeding them treats and food from your palm will go a long way to deepening the shallow bond that you've formed. Also, include at this point the things that'll have to be done to maintain the health of these Pokemon. I'll talk more about the things you'll have to do after the training section, but for now, just be sure to do things like picking up their feet one at a time, checking their teeth, and touching their ears. It'll get them used to it and make it easier for the people that are actually going to be doing the maintenance later on when they have to. And now is when you introduce the saddle and the bridle. Just like everything else, this is going to be done slowly. Start by just putting them in the same space as your Pokemon. Let them inspect them, get to know them before you even try to put them on them. Then move to just draping them on their body. Don't put the saddle on or put the bridle on, just set them on your Pokemon. Your Ponyta or Rapidash is probably not going to like it and shake them off, but this is a persistence game. Keep trying, and reward your Pokemon with treats for any amount of time that it tolerates the saddle or bridle being on them. Once your Pokemon gets to a point where they're used to the equipment being rested on them, that's when you actually strap the equipment down. They may like this even less and try to buck and shake the equipment off, or they may not. If they do, then just let them tire themselves out. Don't take the equipment off, as they have to get used to them if you want any chance of being able to ride them in the future. After you've done these steps a few times and your Pokemon is settled when you strap the saddle down, that's the end of the training for Ponyta. Remember, Ponyta is only 3 feet tall at the shoulder and weighs less than 100 pounds. They are not built for riding, even for small children. I have to reiterate this because it is a common thing for people to get Ponytas for their children and it ends up hurting the animal. Trying to do that will only cause harm to your Pokemon's body and make them less inclined to allow anyone to ride them later on. Once your Ponyta is used to having the saddle on, then you want to lead them around with the lead and get them used to just moving with the saddle. Once they evolve into a Rapidash and get settled into their new body, that's when we start to introduce your weight. This is the part that'll be the slowest and the hardest, as we're fighting against their natural prey instinct of getting whatever the heck is on their back off. And remember that for this part, you should always be wearing your fire protection. They are not going to enjoy having you on their back to begin with, which means you need to protect yourself from that fire. We're going to start by slowly introducing your weight. Start by stepping into the stirrup of the saddle, then stepping out, and then repeat over and over again. And be ready for the Pokemon to shy away from you. You could easily be knocked onto your butt because the Pokemon moves while you're stepping up. Once they get used to that, then you're going to lay across the saddle, now getting them used to the weight being spread across their back. Repeat until they're used to it. Then you're going to sit in the saddle, but not move. Not yet. Once they get used to that, this is the dangerous part, and the part that I'm sure you've been thinking about ever since I've mentioned training these Pokemon. You need to hold on. As soon as you try to move while sitting on these Pokemon, they will want you off. There are a few ways that I've found that you can get through this. One is by just allowing the Pokemon to run in its enclosure while you're on it and allow it to tire itself out. This is the method that my Mudsdale was trained on, and this method usually has a lot less bucking and jumping involved. The other method includes having a circular pen set up and releasing them into it while you're on them. This obviously means a lot less running and a lot more bucking, but then you aren't worried about them running at high speed while you're on them. It's really a matter of preference whichever you decide to go with, but you should always have another person nearby with the Pokemon's Pokeball at the ready, and also ready to call an ambulance if you take a hard spill from the Pokemon. No matter which way you do this, it'll not be over in just one attempt. You're gonna have to do this over and over and over and over and over again. This part is the reason that I said this training will take a long time to do, because this part can take anywhere between months to years depending on how stubborn your Pokemon is. If you're going to do this, then you need to make sure that you have the patience and consistency to stick with it. But after all that work, you will end up having an amazing looking Pokemon that you can ride and really interact with, unlike some of the others that we've talked about in this series. You can even remove the fire protection after the Pokemon becomes comfortable with you on its back, as the flames won't burn you thanks to the bond you've built with the Pokemon. And that's not even the end of the training if you don't want it to be. There are so many other things that you can do with these Pokemon beyond just riding, like agility competitions and shows and races and handling competitions and so many more. The only thing that I do have to add here is, even if you don't choose to do something besides riding your Pokemon, you have to keep up with it consistently. Because if you go a long time between riding sessions, then these Pokemon can actually regress in their training, and you'll have to do some parts all over again, which would be a major pain for anyone. Whew. Okay, training is done. Now the last thing that we're going to talk about is the maintenance that you have to do for the Pokemon's health. And honestly, this isn't too bad, as you probably won't be the one doing it. It's normal for people to call a professional to handle this kind of stuff. These are things like trimming the Pokemon's hooves and putting horseshoes on them to protect their feet from damage, as that can be a major issue for these kinds of Pokemon. A dentist would also be a good idea to see these Pokemon, as their teeth can oftentimes get messed up just through normal use. So really, it's not something major for you to worry about, but you will have to get into contact with the right professionals to make these things happen. Cost. Thanks to the fact that you need not only so much land for these Pokemon, but the tall fencing and the run-in shed, it's gonna be a lot of money for the enclosure. Anytime you're dealing with things that need this much movement room at a minimum, are probably gonna cost a lot, which is why the Ponyta line is in the very high category. And so are the Pokemon themselves. The price from a breeder can vary somewhat depending on if you get a Ponyta or a Rapidash and how well trained they are when you get them. After all, an untrained Ponyta will be much cheaper than a fully trained Rapidash, but no matter what, the enclosure cost and the care cost, along with popularity, are going to push this Pokemon themselves into the very high category. And lastly is the food/maintenance cost. The food itself isn't that bad, with hay being relatively simple to get, and if you live in a place that's warm all year round, then this could be even cheaper with them eating the grass. But really, where the money's going to be coming from here are the supplements in their food and the professionals coming in to take care of the horse's hooves and teeth. Altogether, it's going to be in the high or maybe even the very high category. Conclusion. These Pokemon are gorgeous, and it's easy to see why they're a favorite of so many people around the world. But don't let yourself be blinded by that popularity. To really care for and raise these Pokemon takes a lot of effort, and if you can't put that in, then I would recommend moving on to something else. That's the reason that I had Landslide, my Mudsdale, pre-trained when I got him, and I ride and use him every day for farm work. They can be a lot of effort and a lot of money as well, but they can make great intermediate Pokemon for someone because they're not that complex once the training is done. If you're looking for something that'll test your carrying ability and that you can really interact with without making your entire life about them, then I would say that these are the perfect Pokemon partner for you. Thank you all for listening, and please join us again next time when we go over the dopey, slow-moving Pokemon Slowpoke and its evolutions Slowbro and Slowking. Have a wonderful night, everyone.